Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Hey, it's the 9th of July, and, you know, it says it's 76 degrees outside, but every time I go outside, it's just really fucking hot out. Like, way, way hotter than I expect it to be. And I can only attribute that to this incredible humidity. But, you know, it's okay. We've got plenty of things to keep us indoors. We've got plenty of reasons to be indoors. And, most importantly, I delivered Chris a 4-ounce container, well, 4 ounces of ground ginger, roughly 4 ounces. Maybe it was 8 ounces. But it was a lot bigger than one would expect. And I've been cooking with this stuff for the past, couple weeks now. And I've found that this African ginger, it's available on Amazon. It's actually fantastic. It does all the things that I expect from fresh ginger, and I just have enough of it I can make whatever I want. I was even looking up how to make Reed's style ginger brew, which is actually a lot more complicated than you'd think it would be, and it involves the use of champagne yeast, which I really wasn't prepared for. There's a whole bunch of hardware that I would need if I wanted to make my own actual ginger ale, like real ginger brew. And, I gave a container to my parents, and my mom just made some ginger snaps, like, that night. And so I'm not complaining about the 5-pound bag of ginger that cost about as much as 2 pounds of ginger, because now I get to distribute it.
Yeah, that's a whole lot of ginger. I don't even know what to do with that much ginger. But going back, it's actually like 82 right now. Because, like, when you said that, I was like, what? It felt hot as fuck because we were just outside. But I think the low is like 73 today.
Both my my meters say 76 right now, but I'm willing to believe that it's hotter.
Yeah, because we were just outside running, and that's where I'm like, it felt way hotter than 76.
It says here that the dew point is 71 degrees, so it could be that the moment I walk back indoors, the temperature shift causes water to condense on me, and then
that's very possible.
And then it's just storing all that heat energy because there's no real breeze indoors.
Yeah, Bloomington has some crazy humidity where, it's like it will start to get your carpets wet, as if it's seeping in from the ground, but it's really just collecting in the air. I've had to get used to the humidity around here. It's basically swampland, but a lot of America is actually
Midwest
swampland. It
swamp.
seems like,
Yeah.
when you break it down.
Yeah, I feel like it's. I wonder how hot it was back in like the 1800s when people were doing the westward expansion, because I always see pictures of people wearing like wool pants and long sleeve shirts and hats and big ass jackets, and when I look at imagery from contemporary imagery of people living out west, they're wearing t-shirts and shorts everywhere.
Well, at the same time, I've always heard that some types of long sleeve clothing actually keeps you cool.
Yeah.
So depending on what types they were wearing, that might have been the case. But again, I think there's the notion that all long sleeve clothing is meant to heat, whereas some actually does keep you cool somehow. But I don't know. I'd have to see more examples to know for sure, because that's where, at the same time, you're thinking about their like time in the heat, but they may have had to have the same clothes in the winter. If they're, and it's like, especially in the desert, it gets really cold in desert.
That's true.
you know, at night. So,
So
uh,
you guys have all this ginger, and it gets me thinking. Ginger is thought to be a long used by many cultures medicinal resource. And there's an NIH article that talks about the long-standing alternative medicine, they call it, uses of ginger. And at the same time, they also have a caveat in there about this statement saying that there need to be adequate clinical trials in regards to establishing safety and efficacy of ginger. Of course, it's a dietary, they claim it's a dietary condiment, which we often see it being used in Asian foods or in foods from all over the world and even fusion foods. So I did find a clinical trial being conducted with ginger extract and placebo for asthma treatment, and
Ginger for
it's
asthma.
yeah it's a double-blind placebo-controlled clinical trial currently seeking to enroll 36 participants, and since it's phase one, they're looking for healthy controls. So this means that they're trying to establish safety and toxicity and dose ranging for the ginger extract. And they're starting with 2 grams, a 2 gram capsule of ginger extract. And this is through Columbia University.
that's interesting.
Ginger for asthma.
Yeah, because then that would make me think that it has something to do with the um, vasodilation or something
Yeah.
where um, but that's still going to benefit digestion as well. So that if something benefits your breathing, then it benefits your entire being effectively. So that's kind of where I could see how if somebody's in a slightly immunodeficient state, having some sort of ginger added to their diet may help their blood flow to the point where it makes it seem like ginger is helping whatever the ailment is, when actually it's just actually increasing the blood flow enough for them to get leukocytes to the area where it's like um the the white blood cells getting to an area is just as important. And if you don't have enough
Well, I was just thinking maybe it has the anti-inflammatory effects extend beyond the stomach. Just it might not. It might be more than like a vasodilation and circulatory thing. It could be
Mhm.
that it's not just affecting the stomach. Maybe it has broader anti-inflammatory properties. Because I know that when I overdid it and I put like 4 ounces of ground ginger in my coffee oatmeal protein shake, my stomach went completely numb, and then I had this really intense uh, I couldn't quite. I felt great. I had energy. Like I drank a gallon of coffee, but I didn't feel sick. I didn't feel jittery. I was just ready to go. I felt like I could run, you know, a mile. I don't feel like I can run a mile anywhere, anytime, but I was like ready to go. My back stopped hurting for like 20 minutes, and then I had the weirdest cold sweat. I couldn't tell if I was gonna get like nausea sweats or if I was gonna have a cold sweat, but it felt like kind of like both. But I never got sick.
Hmm.
And then
So you guys are talking about the impact of ginger on the circulatory system, on blood flow, vasodilation. Here's another clinical trial that was essentially an extension of a traditional traditional medicinal practice in Saudi Arabia on consuming ginger dissolved in a hot beverage. And the dietary supplement being tested was 4 grams of ginger dissolved in a liquid for platelet dysfunction. And it was essentially testing whether or not consuming ginger at certain times of day would affect platelet aggregation. And platelet aggregation is something that's mitigated by taking aspirin. So they were looking at ginger even on its effects at that level of preventing platelet aggregation, depending on when somebody took it during the day. But that one was open label, so they didn't have any blinding or masking.
You know, I cook with ginger all the time. That's why I bought it. And what I found is that, you know, we've talked about how when you eat too much of any one thing, eventually you become sensitized to it or desensitized to it. And I've gotten to a point where I'm trying to not add more ginger every time I cook because I don't want to overdo it. But I've also noticed that there's this really, I basically, I feel like I'm maintaining a level of ginger saturation in my system, and I find myself less hungry, maybe, and 'cause I don't think it has anything to do with drinking, you know, the right amounts of water, because I don't feel like I've increased my fluid intake. Well, I think I've increased it proportionally to how much I sweat, because it's peak summer weather, it seems, but not, actually it's not. We're still like a month out from peak summer weather.
Hunger is weird. Let's discuss that for a second
Okay.
because hunger is almost not even directly correlated with how many calories you need at the moment, even down to the hunger signal being delayed after you actually finish your reaching your point of having your stomach saturated, where can people continue to eat past that point because the signals aren't actually, it's delayed. So in that, I think it's crazy that the schedule of people's eating is so tied to um, work rather than thinking about what we actually need. Because there's a lot of times I'll be super hungry before I go to bed, and sometimes I'll eat, and then other times I don't. And then if I don't eat, I'll wake up and not be hungry anymore. So that's where I'm like, if I can sleep, wake up, and not be hungry for then another 6 to 12, 6 to 8 hours, then I didn't really need to eat the first time. But my signals were just tricking me, thinking I need food. But we're so wrapped up in our daily schedule, thinking that we need to eat. Like, we need to eat as many calories as we burn. And if you don't burn a lot of calories, you don't actually need to eat a lot. So if you burn a lot, you need to eat a lot. And it's more so people are more aligned with eating on a schedule rather than eating based on their caloric expenditure. And it's like, if you just eat based on your caloric expenses, it's not actually that difficult to maintain your weight rather than trying to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single fucking day.
Dude, I can't do that 3 meals a day stuff. I don't wake up early enough or hungry at any point unless I'm like, no, that's not true. There have been a few times where I've woken up and, man, I need to eat something. But it's usually after sleeping off a day of heavy exertion, like doing something in the yard, like some gardening or something, and setting up the garden plots. But on most days, I don't have that big hunger. I don't even get hungry until like 1 or 2 o'clock. And then
Yeah.
I try to eat something light, typically, because if I eat something big, then I won't be hungry until like 9 or 10 o'clock. And I try to eat, between around 7 or 8 o'clock typically, because that gives me enough of a window that I can go to sleep at a reasonable hour. But sometimes if I end up eating between 10 and 11, I'm up till 2 or 3 in the morning.
Right, that's what ends up happening, and that's, I call it the gremlin meal. It's like, if you have the gremlin meal, you still have to stay up and be a gremlin for a while, and still like not just sleep on it, because it's like eating after midnight is super dangerous. And at the same time, if you eat after midnight but then just stay up and like have a little activity, it's not that bad. So there's all these things about um, you know, if you eat right before you go to sleep, that shit just your body goes into hibernation mode and it just doesn't burn anything hardly. Um, But that's why, again, if I eat late, then I try not to go to sleep immediately. And like you're saying, you end up staying up till 2 or 3, but you don't get the same effect as eating something at 11 and going to sleep on it, and then waking up with indigestion, you know, being bloated, gaining pound, like just from the timing. I've noticed that if I just change the timing of when I eat, like you're saying, it's really you really start to get in a danger zone after 10 and 11. But that's where those sometimes you just burn so many calories that you really have to, or else you'll go to bed in pain, and nobody wants to do that. There's no need for that. Nobody needs to be a hero like that.
There are also foods that stimulate hunger that seem to be staples of the American diet,
Yeah.
and end up leading to weight gain because people, think that they can just keep eating them, or they just keep eating them, or their appetites are continually stimulated, and they're always feeling hungry, and they don't spend time critically thinking about their food intake and what they want their goals to be. Um, they're not as mindful about when they're eating or what they're eating.
Potatoes seem to be that way, where if I get fast food and don't get the French fries, it just doesn't stick to my body the same way as when you get fries for whatever reason. As you're saying, I think I end up eating way more when I get fries in addition, just more calorically. But potatoes just are the way that they seem. Our body wants to use them is good if you're short on food, which again, it's like there's times when if you're on a budget, potatoes are great. Um,
I'm that way about rice.
yeah, rice is great. But
I
as
can
far
eat
as
so much
empty
rice.
calories go, they can end up being super dangerous, and they just become too much of a staple in American foods, like or in American diets, where you know I think again I've been trying to get the corn syrup out of my diet for a while, and now I'm moving towards like fewer grains and potatoes, and I feel less inflamed inside my body when I abstain from these things, and when I go back to them, it's like they taste great, but I can feel the swelling almost instantly in almost all parts of my body in a way where it's I can't deny that they cause swelling. Like I love a cheeseburger and fries, but that shit makes your gut swell. It makes your arms swell. It makes your chest swell. Your legs, everything fucking swells up when you eat the grains and the salt. And that's why, at the same time, I know if I do it sparingly, it's not that bad. Like I'll eat fries and a burger on the weekend, but if I just skip the fries on the weekdays, like my gut health is just way better.
See, I can take like 2 cups of rice and a chicken breast and some coleslaw mix and turn that into some Chinese style stir fry. And Sheila and I will eat the entire thing. We'll eat, the chicken breast and the cabbage and half an onion and 2 cups of rice. And I might get the sensation of being full at some point, but I usually stop before that happens because I reach this kind of flavor, salt, seasoning, spicy quotient where it's like, okay, that's enough. And then I stop and I have like a snack later. And sometimes I eat it like half an hour later. But I never actually feel full, even though I know that I've eaten enough that I should be full. And I think that's what you were getting at. It's like a dangerous sensation where like the body doesn't trigger the full sensation. Maybe I need to add some sweet stuff to my
Yeah, sweets actually do, because I've ended up having to add sweets to mine just to get that full sensation, because otherwise I'll just keep eating and will just never feel full. Um, and again, it's all these things about your body, well, not your body specifically, but one's body, where we know these triggers exist and we know these failings exist where, too much salt in tandem with too much starch will not trigger your body's full sensation, and you'll just keep eating, and that bag of chips will be gone. Like, as soon as you open it, the fucking story's over
Yeah.
because you had no chance biologically. But as long as you're aware of these things, then you can, one of the best ways to like get around it is rationing. Like, say you have a bag of chips and you ration out a bowl. If you put the bowl out and then close the bag, there's a psychological element to having to go back and refill the bowl because you're trying to avoid eating directly out of the bag, where you prevent yourself from eating out of the bag. And it's like one of those things where it's totally a psychological battle, but that's what it should be, because you, at a certain point, because your body's not going to tell you, hey, you're full, you've had plenty of these, you have to cut yourself off because your body's not built smart enough. Our bodies are stupid. At the end of the day, it's like, I was talking to a friend today about this. I fucking hate the even concept of intelligent design, because our bodies are so horribly designed that intelligent shouldn't be the phrase. It should be bullshit ass, like, toss it at the end of the fucking day, he got tired or whatever. If it was designed, it was not intelligent by any means. Because if you look at the rest of the animal kingdom, the amalgamation of what the human body does, okay, yeah, we can use tools, but individually, we suck.
Yeah.
And most of our body sucks.
It seems like
And
half
that's
of our
where, again, it's
evolutionary
not
advantages
designed
are
well.
accident. I feel like half of our evolutionary advantages were just like accidents that kind of worked.
Again, down to our stomach doesn't even tell you when you should stop eating. It's like 20 minutes late. Some Kramer shit, skidding in the door. Hey! No, that ice cream's too much. You should have put that down. I meant to tell you like 4 scoops ago. Sorry, my bad. That's our stomachs. And that's why it's not intelligent design.
Oh, man.
Like, everything I just described is an accurate representation of the biological mechanism that tells you you're full.
Well, what about...
Like, that's not... in fact, I probably gave it some, like...
You gave it more
credibility. More credibility than it deserves.
Well, what I think is so incredible is that we have this little detector on our nose that can determine with fairly great to a high degree of accuracy whether or not one is able to breed with somebody and create outcomes with a beneficial immune systems. So we have it's major histocompatibility complex, and it's directly tied to determining immune system compatibility. It's a really cool function. And yet we spend hundreds of years developing perfumes and colognants to override this sensibility. And then once you throw in like hormone therapy, like it's all out the window. So we've got this fantastic way of determining whether or not somebody of interest and you or one will pair, and their combined genetic code will create a new human with successful immune system. We completely override it. It makes no sense to me. It's like, I've got these eyes and I can see really well, but let me put these cardboard things in front of them with slits on them. I don't know. We're not in a sandstorm. I just like wearing these things. They're fashion sunglasses.
Again, this gets back to, we have hair on our heads. Other animals have body hair, but we need clothes because over time, we started losing hair in the places that we happen to now wear clothes. So, or we lost hair enough that we needed the clothes, whereas our animal brethren don't need that bullshit because they have the fur. So that's why, again, there's all these forks and side you can't call them upgrades. You can call them side patches, I guess, to our species that don't make any sense, which end up giving the conspiracy theorists ammo because it's like that doesn't make any sense. So when you're trying to talk about evolution and you have species that develop fur and then lose the fur, but then have to go back to clothing because the fur was actually keeping them warm, then you can start talking about some stupid alien bullshit because our evolutionary design fucked up. And then you're like, well, maybe it was aliens. It's like, no, humans' DNA is just shitty. It's not that deep. Like, we just have bad, shitty DNA and RNA combinations.
There are a lot of...
And this planet is like a shitty environment. It's kind of a Goldilocks zone, but we really go through periods of luck, and then we get cast back into ice ages. So then you need more hair than others, so you can't be titties out. And it's like, you know, there's all these periods now. It's like, we're titties out right now, but they can't be titties out in Australia and New Zealand. And we can't, we're so limited in our thinking that it's hard to even imagine people needed to be bundled up right now. But that's how it is on the other side of the planet. Like, but it's just, our brains are so incapable of grasping what we need to grasp in order to survive over long periods of time.
Yeah. You know, I'm just thinking about, you can't be titties out all the time now. It just kind of blows my mind. There have been so many times when I've been perusing like National Geographic and they're exploring some tribe that hasn't encountered humans for 100 years, and they're practically naked. Mm-hmm. And they don't have concepts of shame at all. That's like totally brought to them.
Because nudity's not sexualized there.
Yeah. And then there's something about the environment where they don't need as much body hair because it's like a jungle, and they need to sweat. They don't need to retain heat.
Yeah, because there's a tribe that doesn't have sweat glands. I forget what the name of it is, but you know, anybody who's listening can look it up. They don't have sweat glands, so if they go outside of their like climate, it'll fuck them up real bad. But they've been in the same area for so long that they just have evolved to not need sweat glands.
So they'd have to hang out with their mouth open and their tongue out. Like a dog.
No,
right?
no, not at all. They just like...
No, I mean, if we took them to some place...
They don't wear clothes. Like, they have, like, skirts and shit, so they don't just... Like, their bodies just don't get that hot. Their bodies have, like...
They have some kind of advantage.
Homeostasis in their environment so that they didn't need the sweat glands in the same way that you and I do to cool our bodies in our environment, because we're wearing clothes all the time. I mean, maybe, like, who knows if the sweat, like, the clothes and the sweat glands, whatever, like, obviously you could go back, but it's a matter of, regardless, they don't have the sweat glands in the same way that we do, and it's largely because they just haven't been wearing clothes, but they also haven't been in a place that gets super cold.
Yeah.
So it's like this the perfect environment for them not to need sweat glands.
You know, I wonder how much of it, like on our end, is preservatives or chemicals in the processed foods that cause us to sweat more. Because I notice whenever I go on some like fruit fast, after a few days, I stop having my body sweat completely changes, and the way that I feel changes, obviously. And then next thing you know, I eat I don't know. I can't even think of the first thing I try to eat after I do that kind of thing. Probably a hamburger, but I notice right away that like everything changes. And you know, we joke about things like meat sweats, but meat sweats are actually kind of real. And I think a lot of it has to do with the kind of salts we apply to meats when we cook them, or the kind of the salt or seasoning that's applied to meat at like a fast food place. Because that stuff's like, they know what those things are down to the chemical level. So,
I mean, I want to say the stronger the spice in your food, the more likely you'll be able to smell it in your sweat.
Yeah.
Just a basic way to approach it, because it don't have to even be meat. You
Yeah.
know, if you season your vegetables strong, then your sweat is gonna probably smell a little curryish, like straight up.
No, no, that's very true. I've used the same seasoning blend for when I do fried chicken, and then I've used it on squash and onions, and the end result is they have a very similar flavor profile. The texture profile is different, of course, because squash is definitely not like chicken, but the flavor profile is very similar, and it really comes down to the seasoning and the preparation method.
Yeah, I think Americans just weren't good at cooking vegetables for a very long time until they had their ethnic brethren introduce them to spices that you know made vegetables not be so shitty because they just didn't boil them and butter them.
Oh man.
Um,
Or just simply overcook or just cook the living crap out
right?
of them.
Yes.
Like all too many times I've had broccoli where it's basically one step away from mush. But when I've been to like Chinese restaurants or Japanese restaurants or anything other than Americana cuisine, they'll do a vegetable in such a way that it doesn't turn to mush. That like they somehow magically figured out the way to prepare a vegetable so that it retains its dimension and it hasn't turned it still has like a texture profile to it that's not homogeneous with everything else. I'm not saying that fall off the bone barbecue isn't desirable or that, but there is a point when foods are overcooked,
Oh yeah,
and
for
it
sure.
doesn't
And
necessarily mean that they're burnt. It just means they've been cooking for too long.
I think obviously with age and experience, you start to learn the difference. But I think a lot of people don't. They don't get the opportunity to be exposed to like perfectly cooked stuff because it don't have anything to do with the cost because I think you cook, what is it, sous vide at your place.
Yeah.
It's like it had nothing, like it wasn't it. I don't know how, like, you can't put a price on cooking at your house, so like it didn't matter like who cooked it, in the sense of nobody paid for it, so the experience was like not about the monetary aspect, but that was like perfectly cooked duck,
Yeah.
where you're saying a lot of people don't get to experience that because they assume that they have to wait until they can pay like $300 or four
Oh
hundred
man.
dollars instead of trying to learn how to do it themselves and like failing a couple times and then getting it right the perfect time. Where again, it's like I don't know how many times you tried it before that, but that time was fucking amazing. So I'm assuming I assume most people don't get shit like perfect on their first time, but that's where again, it's not about, it doesn't matter, like the experience was not about the cost,
No, it was about
and
the
it
way
has
it comes
nothing
out.
to like people can't keep tying like the quality of cost to the cost of it,
So
or the quality of experience to the cost of it.
So, for anyone who's wondering, sous vide technique involves vacuum sealing your meats or your vegetables. You can do fish. You can cook an egg in sous vide if you really want to control your temperature. But anyways, you bring water up to a certain temperature, and it's got to be temperature stable. So you got to use a fairly decent amount of water, and then you submerge your vacuum sealed whatever you're preparing into it, and there are charts that you can use to calculate cook time for a weight and a type of food. So, anyways, most meats, like a steak, for example, would require something on the order of like 135, 138 degrees, depending on how much fat it has in it. And you sit that in the water for, well, till it comes up to temp, till it comes up to 138 degrees. And then you hold it there for some period of time, depending on its size and the type of cut of meat it is. And the idea is that at 100 in that temperature range, you are activating enzymatic reaction, and it's breaking down connective tissues, converting any collagen to gelatin, which is delicious, by the way. And then you can suspend it at that temperature for as long as you want. The longer you suspend it, the more tender it becomes. But there is a point of diminishing returns where if it's in the it's suspended for in the bath for like 16 hours, it comes out mushy. But if you pull it out anywhere within like the half hour to 2 hour range, you can take that perfectly cooked piece of meat and then you throw it on the hottest, like most searing hot broiler pan or grill, if you got that ready. Flip it over so you sear both sides, and the next thing you know, you have a piece of meat that you would have to pay 50, 60, 70, 100, $150 for at a steakhouse because of the preparation method. And this is a French technique. And if you have a meat thermometer and a crock pot that the low setting sits at like 140, you can sous vide. You just have to be careful about it and turn it on and off regularly so it doesn't get too hot. You can't let it simmer. It can't get up beyond 140 degrees, otherwise you tempt fate. But it's not hard. It's the science. It's cooking meat with science. I highly recommend it because you can do things like a duck, which is really fatty, and you have to actually get that pretty fucking hot. You can seal that in a bag and you bring it up to temperature. Now I can't remember what it is. It's like set it at like 200 degrees for some period of time, and you throw it in there, and it cooks the fat. It renders the fat down, and then the duck will basically boil in its own juices. And then when you're done, you throw it in the broiler, and it crisps it up nice on the outside. These are all things that are actually fairly simple. Of course, you have to have a vacuum sealer, like a food saver vacuum machine. I actually highly recommend this to anyone who's interested in having like perfectly cooked meat because it's not hard.
Well, then, do you have to do anything to make sure that the bag doesn't
It'll break
leak
the seal.
particulates or whatever?
Well, most food
Is there
saver,
like a specific type of bag?
yeah, food saver bags. Food Saver is a brand, but vacuum sealed bags for food grade there's like food grade and non-food grade, and the food grade ones are made out of BPA free plastics, and it's pretty hard. You gotta look for the ones that are not for storing food. But other than that, it's really simple. I actually created double seal because I've had a single seal rupture on me before, and that's no fun. The most interesting thing that I've made with the technique was a turducken. It was a turducken breast, so it was a turkey, duck, and chicken breast, all stuffed chicken inside of inside of turkey, and that was like a 2.5 hour process. And pulled it out. I made them twice actually, but the second time was much better because after it was done, I threw it into the broiler for about 10 minutes, and it came out, and the outside was completely crispy. I gave it a nice coat of oil before I did that. But these are things that you typically have to go to a diamond rated restaurant to find, like a sous vide method. For some reason, it's not you don't find it you won't find that technique at Applebee's. They just throw shit in the fucking microwave and nuke that shit, and then it comes out mushy. But
Well, because that's because Americans are told that Olive Garden's gourmet, and they never go anywhere else to know that that's not actually gourmet. To learn,
yeah,
and if you're satisfied paying $40-$50 for all you can eat fucking Alfredo that's like heated in a microwave and some all you can eat breadsticks, and that's gourmet, and I don't know if that person, it's like once you get to that point, I don't know if that person is capable of then getting to a point where they can appreciate the other, and it's just throwing it away on them, and they're like, give me a well done steak. I want a well done steak
God.
and some A1 sauce.
Well, that goes back to the origins of the American palate. If we look at what generations have become used to, or the origins of all of the additives to broadly consumed affordable foods from the early 20th century that ended up holding over after the implementation of federal regulations and the creation of the FDA all the way through today. I think those really had an impact on what people think is good food because they're just so used to, for instance, canned foods. People understood that canned food would degrade. Like a fresh pea or a fresh, green bean isn't going to be the same as a canned green bean, especially if it's going to be sitting on a shelf for a while or if it's going to be packed in a juice or, stirred in a vat for, several hours, just like stewing. So if that's going to get canned, then there's going to be preservatives added to it, like various salts or other different types of chemicals and things. Upton Sinclair exposed the meat canning industry that was getting a lot of soldiers overseas ill with things like botulism, and because they were just sending off whatever they could, and there wasn't much regulation. After that was exposed, then there was a lot more oversight and a lot more federal inspection and control. But even with all of that control, that doesn't mean that it's going to produce a sensitive palate. It's essentially going to produce a palate that is used to chemically treated or refined or overly salted or heavily sodium saturated or trans fatty foods. And especially with the proliferation of various different types of sugar additives and artificial sweeteners to different foods, people's concept, and I think, Chris, you've spoken to this, how people's taste buds can just get completely shot after one serving of a particular kind of food, and it can take up to 24 hours for it to reset. So if people are eating foods like that day in, day out without giving it another thought, and then they go out to eat, of course they're not going to even begin to understand, especially if they don't have the mindfulness or the understanding of the impact of what they're eating on a regular basis on their palate and their capacity to discern individual different types of flavors. And it also becomes an affordability issue because people are essentially funneled into various food options, and Olive Garden may be gourmet to somebody because that's perhaps the most expensive thing that they can spend their money on at the time, when they don't realize that they could spend a comparable amount of money maybe one time or even less setting up the appropriate kitchen implements and apparatuses in their own kitchen or in their own home, and then buying quality ingredients in order to create a meal that would taste far better.
Yeah, I think you nailed on, it may seem like the tools are a steep investment in some cases, but being able to produce those level of quality meals, you just can't do it without the proper tools. So at the same time, once you have the tools, you can do that over and over. So I, it's one of those things where, again, I learning how to cook a steak in a way where you don't need any sauce is a level where many people, I guess, just don't get to, and they need to pay somebody else to do it, where it's like you can learn how to cook a steak yourself.
Yeah.
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 Gordon Ramsay has a bunch of videos online about random shit if you don't want to go to school. But in 2020, you can really learn how to, you can learn how to make sushi. There's all kinds of shit you can learn how to do, understanding that you need the proper tools, that once you learn how to do it, fuck, man, I don't eat sushi often enough to learn how to make it. And I don't want to be eating sushi all the time.
Where you learn how to make
so
it.
I don't learn how to make it.
Yeah.
But if I ate sushi enough, I would learn how to make it. It's just something I may eat 2 or 3 times a year, at most.
Yeah.
So
I've made I wouldn't say a serious investment. I've spent about $100 in tools for stir fry cooking over the course of the last year. And at every step, it was, do I need this? Is this gonna? Am I ready for this even, or am I just gonna be wasting, or not wasting, procuring this device ahead of schedule? And I feel fairly confident that I didn't get a melting dome until it was the right time, and I didn't get the right kind of spatula or ladle until it was the right time. I didn't invest in a set of metal mixing dishes until I was absolutely ready to, because I was able to move at a quick enough speed that I needed to have everything ready to go as the oil was hot, because my one big hurdle is still my burner puts out maybe 1/5 of what a commercial wok range would put out. And that's not to say that 18,500 BTUs is sufficient to get oil hot relatively quickly, but it's not that instantaneous boiling oil heat that a wok range puts out. And I can get like a cheap one for $500, and the one that I actually really like is almost $2,000. So I'm definitely not getting that anytime soon. But there is something to be said for investing in the right kind of tools, because they do kind of unlock potential. There are a lot of knife techniques for cutting vegetables or meat for Chinese style cuisine that you need a certain size blade. Otherwise, the blade's just physically not big enough to rest on the side of your fingers, and then you won't get the angle right. And then there are certain types of utensils that are extra long, because you got to get that into the middle or to the other side of a wok over high heat. And it might seem like awkward and huge for a normal skillet, but a normal spatula isn't big enough. You end up with your hand inside the wok if your spatula is not big enough. So you do need the right tools at some point, but you don't. I didn't need all of that stuff in the beginning. All I needed was a wok and a wooden spatula, and I was able to get started.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that because we live in a society where it's so easy to figure out the requirements to do the whole thing, and you watch a video of like Chef John, master of Cantonese cuisine, showing you how to do this stuff in a $100,000 kitchen, and it's like, man, I need all that stuff, but you really don't. And also there are videos of Chef John where he like breaks it down over like a simple stove and does it like home style as opposed to fancy kitchen style. But that stuff's not all necessary. Mm-hmm. You can grill a steak perfectly on one of those Coleman circular charcoal grills. And those are very affordable. I think it comes down to time and how much time somebody's willing to invest in learning that kind of process. There's a discipline to it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and the collective or the gross attention span that accounts for the people who do take the time to learn those things versus the people who don't. And I think a lot of people, I mean, we can even see by the people who are going out to eat right now. I mean, that this is by the hundreds of thousands, people going out in the face of a deadly disease that day by day we're learning more and more about how it affects the human body in an adverse way and how easily it can be spread. But people just seem to really need to go out and get food prepared for them. And this is, I think that's indicative of how many people in the country or in certain parts of the country actually know or have the attention span for learning how to cook, or the patience or the know-how, or I'm not even sure what it is, because how many explanations really can apply to so many people.
Access to ingredients.
Well, I think a lot of it is the know-how, in that one of the best burgers I've had in my life was cooked on a heating pad wrapped in aluminum foil. Because it wasn't about sometimes the tools are one part, but if somebody knows how to transfer heat and understands how to season, they can use aluminum foil and heating pad and put any burger that anybody else could make to shame in a way where I'm like, it's like, it sounds crazy, but that person knew how to cook. So it didn't matter if it was a heating pad, if it was their car engine, if it was a fucking charcoal grill, They were gonna make a bomb ass burger because they knew how to cook and they knew physics in a way where that's where I'm like, that person, like he was one of the people in my uh produce department when I worked at a grocery store. And again, it's like I've seen him make enough burgers using a heating pad and foil, so I know it wasn't a fluke. And it was like, yeah, somebody could do that shit once and it's a fluke. But this dude did that shit all the time where I'm like, it's, he was
There
just,
was when I was Boy Scout, there were masters of the hobo dinner, which is like a piece of aluminum foil folded into a pouch, and you put your burger, your potatoes, and some carrot, maybe some cabbage or whatever in it, your seasoning, and then you roll it up and you toss it into a fire, and
yep.
it comes out, and you open it up, and you have this. Basically, you have a stew. It turns into a stew inside the aluminum foil. When you were talking about that hamburger, it reminded me the best taquito I ever had was out back of a construction site. These guys from Bolivia were making taquitos on a Coleman camping stove in an aluminum pan, and they were just throwing some fat and carnitas in it, and then they would throw their tortilla on it and their other ingredients, and then next thing you know, they rolled the thing up, like, here you go, man. And it was fantastic. It was the gourmet moment of having a taquito that normally you get at a gas station reluctantly because you're in the middle of an 8-hour drive and the sun's starting to come up and you need to eat something because you're starting to get hungry from sitting still for so damn long. But it's the only thing they've got that doesn't look like it's a weathered, tired glove. But
Yeah, I had the pleasure of studying with somebody who learned how to create a variety or cook a variety of meals using just a heating plate and the ingredients he had available, which at times were quite limited. And he shared some of that cuisine with me, and it was quite delicious. So, and he had also had professional experience cooking at a Chinese restaurant, um, and he gained a lot of knowledge there. But yeah, like you guys are saying, a lot of it's the know-how or the capacity to absorb that knowledge, and then through repetition, develop that good cooking kung fu.
I'm also motivated by being able to prepare the meals that my mom knows how to make. That at some point I will acknowledge that she's getting old and she's not going to be around forever. And if I don't learn how to cook like that, then I'm going to be at the mercy of restaurants or whatever industrial Chinese food is available at the time. And I don't want that. I want to be able to make my own dumplings. One of my goals is to learn how to. Well, actually, the next phase of my journey through Cantonese cuisine will be hot pot, and then I'm gonna start learning how to do dumplings because I want to be able to make dim sum. Because the entire 30 years that I've been in Indiana, there's only been a couple places that did dim sum well, and they never last long because, well, in Bloomington, the Chinese restaurants seem to come in waves. Whenever there's like a Chinese family or a Chinese student whose family is going to open up a restaurant, sometimes we get some really good Chinese food, and sometimes it's okay. But there was one. I think it's still around actually. They do some decent dumplings, but they don't do the full like New York or San Francisco or Boston or Seattle Chinatown dim sum package. They've got a toned down version of it. And there was a place in Indianapolis that did dim sum, but they're gone now. So, with limited options, I need to learn how to do this stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to be at the mercy of having to travel to get it. That's not right. That we live far enough into an advanced age that the only real limitation would be my own desire and my access to the materials, to the actual food supply. But making dough
Yeah,
is a big challenge.
that's like, you know, that's gonna take time, man. And
Yeah.
again, I think that's where if it seems like it should be so easy, but coordinating that time
No, it's not going to be
to
easy.
actually learn it is like getting adults to have 3 hours of coordinated time is way more difficult than it should theme should be.
Well, I mean, we in popular culture, the home ec class is often the butt of a joke, you know,
Right.
and it's like financial literacy.
Yeah.
Um, if people are taught in middle school or in high school, you know, about the importance of cooking, and they're not just indoctrinated to ignore things like that, or they're just bombarded with facts for them to regurgitate so they can get good test scores, and instead, you know, there's real life, real world survival skills included, because, you know, maybe there's a downturn in the economy, but you have access to food. It would be great if you knew how to cook for yourself instead of having to rely on, you know, ordering contactless delivery at a premium. Um, so, you know, it kind of goes hand in hand with those ideas.
Yeah, that whole man, it's crazy to see how many people can't. Well, okay, I understand. Like some people never got the chance to learn how to cook, but when you're in the middle of a pandemic, I guess maybe now is not the time to like. On the one hand, it seems like it would be the time to learn, but I guess if you're an adult, now's not the time to be eating a bunch of shitty food in their heads. And learning test meals or having test meals to yeah. I can't find a way to understand that mindset. Um but yeah, this is a strange time to not, because again it's like, is it really worth risking COVID for having more chicken sandwiches than you should?
Uh,
Like
but
I feel bad for, well, I don't necessarily know if the right word is feel bad, but if somebody is getting COVID over a fucking burger or a chicken sandwich or some shit, that's like, I
okay.
feel like that's worse than getting COVID for $1.
So you can go to practically any grocery store and get steak and shake seasoning, or you can get some.
Mhm.
Ooh, we've got a siren in the distance. You can get COVID free. You can get your meat tenderizer, your seasoning at practically any grocery store, and then you get to choose your own cut of chicken or your own cut of beef. Hold on a second.
Yeah, once I found out that you can buy the seasoning,
It's a life changing event because
yeah,
you realize that not only can you make your own burger with the right kind of seasoning profile or flavor profile, but you can actually select the meat that goes into it. And if you get the right kind of meat, let's say you want to spend a little bit more on like a, you know, something that's not a tube of beef, of ground beef, but something that is ground locally, with like some kind of grain-fed beef that hasn't been processed, so it hasn't been gassed with ammonia. Lo and behold, that burger tastes infinitely better than any ammonia processed beef that they have to add some weird agar to, so it'll thicken up and hold itself together and not just fall apart, because that stuff's barely beef as it is. Or let's say a chicken breast. You can actually choose your chicken breast. You can cut it to the right size and thickness, and then you season that thing, sear it in some, or throw it in the oven even, and just like roast it. Or you can bread it and pan fry it, or bread it and throw it in the oven. And next thing you know, you have a breaded chicken breast that you can throw on bread with lettuce, tomato, mayo, onion, pickle, whatever you like on it's mustard. I like mustard on my chicken sandwiches. But that whole process is, well, that whole process doesn't take that long. Maybe 20 minutes if you are moving quickly and have all the tools ready. But it's also not really practical, I guess, to fire up a grill just for one chicken breast. Maybe if you have gas.
Also
yeah,
depends on the kind of grill or the quality of cooking experience you're looking for, because there
Yeah.
are some I mean, there's like the George Foreman type grills, or those types of heating coil grills.
Those things are
That
awesome, actually.
I'm sorry.
George Foreman grills are awesome. I've only
Yeah, no,
Oh yeah, yeah,
grills
yeah.
like that, they're fantastic, especially if you want to, if you have some boneless chicken thighs or chicken breasts, or if you have some burgers that you've pre-seasoned, and you have the temperature is controlled, and you can cook multiple things at once, and then you just wait for it to reset and you put it on there again.
They're awesome for grilled cheese too,
Yeah,
without a bunch of butter.
yeah, or
Um,
I mean, if people are into processed foods, or even if it's like some of the more gourmet stuff, or even if people make their own, sausages, they can heat them up on those as well.
So when I make a grilled cheese sandwich, I like to use a bunch of different cheeses,
mhm.
and I'm talking about a fancy grilled cheese sandwich.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But you can, if you start with a piece of real bread, some actual like a baker's loaf. Go to like a Panera or something, or even just the bakery of Kroger, because they have real bread there too. They even have real bread at Aldi. They have some really nice rolls of loaves
Oh
of bread
yeah,
at Aldi. It's
yeah.
actually quite impressive. But anyway, you take a chunk of bread that hasn't already been sliced up, and you give yourself just a little bit more, like 1.5 times thicker than a normal slice of bread. And you take two of those things, and I butter one side, and I put that down on low heat, because the goal is just to get that nice and hot. And then I put some butter on the other sides, because eventually I'm going to flip it, and those are going to be the outsides of the grilled cheese sandwich. But I get the inside hot, and then I'll take a piece of Munster and a piece of provolone, and if I have it, I'll throw like some shredded like Mexican cheese or Mexican cheese blend, because queso melts at a real low temperature. It actually like seeps into the bread if you do it right. So I take those things and I'll put that on there, and I'll turn my bread over and put the cheese on. Wait for it to kind of grab a hold of the bread, and then I'll combine the two, and then I put a lid over it. Believe it or not, I put a lid over this thing in a skillet, and wait for it to go for a little while. Pull the lid off, flip the thing back over. But the lid is the key, because it melts the cheese down. It focuses that heat back down, and it allows the cheese to work its way into the bread. And this is like a critical part, because once you put the cheese together and it starts to merge into itself, there's no turning back. You can't open it back up without exposing the cheese, and now you're going to melt some cheese down onto the surface of the pan, and you might actually be into that, but I try not to do that. But before I'll do that, I'll season it a little bit. Sometimes I want some pepper in there. Um, sometimes I put garlic in it. Sometimes I use like some onion powder, even just a little bit. It really depends on the kind of cheese, though.
Yeah, and I found spinach goes really well in grilled cheese
Oh
sandwiches too.
yeah.
Um,
But I'm not talking about taking it to the point of like cooking meats into it. I've tried that, but
no, 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 no.
that's
I'm
like a
talking
whole
about like
different level.
spinach and maybe tomatoes sometimes.
Tomato works pretty well. It has to be really
Um,
dry though. Like aroma is a good tomato, because it's
yeah,
really
it has to be
pasty.
like aroma or something, not just a regular ass
Yeah,
tomato.
regular tomatoes are just so juicy that you end up increasing the total amount of moisture in the sandwich, and they can turn out soggy. I
I
like
like
put.
experimenting with different types of bread in my grilled cheese.
Oh yeah, that's like the
Like
key there.
sometimes it tastes fantastic. Like if I heat up the cheese and then I add some tomato on some really like coarse brown bread,
Mm.
um, it's absolutely delicious. Or with sourdough, and with some cool vegetables on the side or something like that. Tastes good.
What's the salad? It's like fresh tomato, mozzarella, and basil.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I've made grilled cheese out of that kind of blend before, but I've had to use really dense bread so that the oil and vinegar didn't just ruin it. Um, Begins with like a C, I think. I can't remember what it's called. Man, I need to do a grilled cheese night now.
Use canola oil.
um, no, I'm talking about the salad type. It's the mozzarella
Oh,
Caprese.
caprese.
caprese. That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I couldn't for whatever reason. My brain was like, I kept thinking like Caprica, and it's like, no, that's that planet in Battlestar Galactica. Caprica salad. What the fuck?
Sounds like a grilled cheese cookbook in the making.
It would be completely unordered given the nature of our show. Exceptionally random grilled cheese. 52 different grilled cheese sandwiches, one for every week of the year. You'll never make the
52
same.
just because. No,
Just
52.
because you'll never make the same grilled cheese for a year that's the goal.
Awesome.
There's plenty of cheeses out there.
Yeah, you heard it here, folks. We're gonna release a exceptional Rando grilled cheese cookbook here within the coming months. Be ready. Be very ready because we're
Keep your eyes peeled.
yeah, along with other interesting items that we were in the works and that we have in the works.
Things in development.
I'm serious though. We need to make that grilled cheese cookbook because that could actually be pretty cool. At least just to have a repository of excellent grilled cheese options.
Absolutely.
Yeah, even down to because part of it is cheeses can be so different that you need to know what goes, what type of cheese goes with what type of bread, with what type of toppings. Understanding that everything's not gonna work because I can't imagine cheddar and rye necessarily working out in a grilled cheese, but it may work. I don't know. Maybe like there's just got to be different combinations where you're like, we got to test these first.
Yeah, there's got to be like an exceptional Randos test kitchen or something.
Yeah. Like, you got to find the perfect cheese for rye bread. Like,
Can we do wine pairings with it? 'Cause we're
exactly.
doing-
I know some people that are they're really into the whole wine pairing microcosm. I'll reach out to some of them because they've been doing that stuff for how old are we now? We're all pushing 40. So these are some people that have been like doing this wine thing for at least the last 2 decades. And some of them moved out west. Some of them are in Oregon. Some of them started their own wine labels. I'll ask them about that kind of stuff. Maybe we can get a wine aficionado on the show some point.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. Because I remember whenever I was hanging out with them, I was learning things about wines that it's like, oh, really? Well, I never would have thought about that kind of stuff. And it was really interesting to, it's just really interesting to be around, people who are really, really enthusiastic about their wines because that's a whole world of complex flavor profiles that I feel like you have to be told what you're looking for the first couple times around before you start to recognize, a cheese overtone or an apple overtone in a bottle of wine that has no indication from looking at it that would have any kind of flavor profile other than fermented grape.
Yeah, I asked some mutual friends of ours about how do I learn about wine? How do I better understand wine? And their answer was, well, you have to start by drinking several different wines. Just drink a bunch of different wine, and you'll start to learn all about it.
Yeah, and what I found is like, it feels as if people are making up half the shit about the descriptions of the flavors. But some people actually can taste the stuff, but I want to say, in half the time, in my experience, people are just like going off of what they read on the bottle or something. Oh yeah, it's really got a smoky flavor. Like,
yeah. You can
the
really
fuck does that even
you can really
mean?
taste
Like,
the something overtones. Insert
Yeah.
word
It's
overtones.
oaky and tannic.
yeah, and they'll say all this shit like, oh, it has really earthy undertones.
It has a firm
and
nose.
they know what that means, but if you're not part of the club, it just sounds like a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah, a
'Cause
solid
then when you
body
hear
and a
him,
firm
like,
nose.
again, it's hard to say it's not bullshit because too many people fake it. But enough people don't fake it
Well-
as to where I'm like, it's not complete bullshit.
God, it was like 10 years ago. There was this piece on NPR where they put people inside of an MRI, I think it was an MRI, and they fed them through a tube. They fed them box wine, the same box wine, but they would give them different cards to read with the description of the wine and the qualities. And in a significant number of them, they agreed with the card. and they
Yep.
couldn't tell the difference between the bottles of wine. And then a few months later, I remember reading another piece where one guy who's like a renowned wine taster, wine journalist, was talking about how a lot of times the awards that are given to various vineyards, it's basically just a club, and that after the first couple tastings, you can't taste anything, and so
Right.
people are just, they want their friends to be successful. They're in a position to market and promote at a very high level because they've gained some kind of credibility within an industry. And so they just write pieces that help sell the wine and sell the idea, the culture, um, the aesthetic of drinking wine. And that's cool. People want to have their interest and want to have their clubs. Some people can apparently taste, what's that the bitterness index for the IPA that everyone always talks about. Like, we can only taste so much bitter before it's like, oh, that's it. But there are some people out there who really like IPAs.
Hmm.
And there's some IPAs that I think taste really interesting. Like, some of them have this really complex citrusy flavor. And then you find out that there's like no citrus involved whatsoever.
Right.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. No, I'm one of those people, man.
Yeah.
I like I prefer IPAs over most beers, um, in general now. But it happened over time. It wasn't like that always.
Yeah.
Um,
I
which
dig. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, I dig IPAs as well. When I go for beers, typically, it there's just I if I'm going to drink alcohol, I want it to be like a complex experience, and I feel it's like kind of stimulating to taste the bitterness along with some of the citrus flavor, because some of them are very overtly flavored. And I'm not claiming to be like a taste expert or an expert beer connoisseur or anything like that, but I've had enough beer that I can definitely pick up on, okay, this is just a lager, this is like something very weedy, and then okay, this is an IPA because it has a very distinct kind of bitterness, which I think here it's called the IBU, the International Bitterness Unit Scale. And yeah, also I think IPAs come with a bit of a higher alcohol content. Right, typically it's like you can get an IPA that it'll start at around 6 or 7% alcohol by volume, and some of these can go up to like 15%. So it's like you drink a 16-ounce can of this IPA, and you're basically like drinking 16 ounces of wine, and beer. Sometimes I don't know how people are, I don't know how beer connoisseur culture, um, tries to suggest the consumption of beer, if they like to sip it or if they like to drink it at a different pace, or if you drink it differently if you're having a meal or different kinds of foods. Um, but if you just drink the beer down like you would, like a different kind of beer or a less alcoholic type of beer, then you're definitely going to feel that
Yep.
a lot faster.
Yeah, you can't drink IPAs the same as you drink just
Miller
like
Lite.
what's it called, Belgian ale or something,
Oh,
Belgian wheat ale. Like
I like
those are
those.
so few less alcohol by content. Um, that, you might need to drink four Belgian wheat ales to two IPAs.
Well, the trick with a Belgian wheat is you have to get a real Belgian wheat and get like a duple or a triple or a quadruple, where
Well, even those are like 6 and 7%. Like I've
some of
seen,
them are really potent though.
9%, but
The coolest thing
compared to
about those is,
IPAs, they're still just
well, yeah,
like, well, because they spice them too, where um the doubles and triples will have like coriander, I think, in them.
hmm, well,
Um,
some will.
so I mean, yeah, not all of them obviously, but they'll have some spice where
Like,
um
some of them are hard to drink, I'll admit, but some of them
yeah,
are kind of, the only thing I can really compare it to, it has the consistency of like cream soda or a root beer, or it's kind of a really smooth beer, and then again, some of them are like drinking liquid bread. So Belgian ales are a pretty diverse descriptor, I think. It's not
Yeah,
like an American light beer where Bud Light and Coors Light and Miller Light all kind of taste the same to me.
yeah. There's some Belgian ales where you can get something like a Belgian blonde ale, and that'll be like 8%, and it's similar to drinking like a wheat beer, except it has a bit of a different flavor profile. And then there are some other Belgian ales that I've had that are like ridiculously high alcohol content in comparison, and also very thick. And like
Yeah.
you said, like drinking bread essentially. And then there are some other beers that have a pretty high sugar content to them, or they're very sweet, and that in conjunction with the bit of a higher alcohol content um, can also lead to a quicker intoxication because maybe you drink it faster.
Yeah, that happens with the ciders too.
Oh yeah, ciders are great.
Cider's delicious.
Yeah.
There's this one cider that I tried many years ago. I think it's like Old Speckled Hen or something like that. And I remember thinking as I drank it, it's like, man, this isn't very strong. And then later I realized how wrong my initial assessment was. It was just so sweet that I didn't realize how much alcohol it actually had, and then
Yep.
how the combination
Drink it
of
fast too.
yeah, well, it was so sweet. And so I had my first White Claw, I think, like a couple of months ago because Sheila brought home some White Claw. And so I was figuring, yeah, why not? I'll try one of these things. And it was like slightly. It was like drinking a pouch of Capri Sun really fast and having a container of rubbing alcohol on an open container of rubbing alcohol on the counter in front of me when I drank it. That's what I felt like. And the thing was gone, like lickety split, because it tasted like a freaking Capri Sun. And then the next thing I know, it's like the thing kicks in, and I realize this is why people like this stuff. Because it's Kool-Aid, it's Capri Sun, it's there's something about it that's so that almost transports you to this kind of youthful juice package kind of mentality about it. It's really kind of crazy.
Kind of reminds me of I don't even know if they sell it anymore, but it was like Smirnoff Ice.
Yeah.
Oh god.
Like it was just one of those beverages that you could just drink really quickly, and it was actually kind of deceivingly strong, or deceptively strong.
There was a culture of getting iced, where if you were at a cookout and someone handed you an open Smirnoff Ice, you were supposed to drink it. And I remember going to
That doesn't seem safe.
No, it's not. I remember going to a cookout, and someone was very interested in doing this, and they would like snatch people's beer out from their hand and then quickly replace it with a Smirnoff, and they would grab it and be like, "What are you doing?" And they would take a drink of it and be like, the big reveal. It's like, "Oh, I just swapped your beer out for something else. Now it's yours." Like, it was so surreal watching people like spend money on type of booze that they were trying to swap out with people to make them drink it. I think the idea is that because you can drink it so quickly that most people don't put up too much of a fight, and then they taste it and they're like, I'm not sure, or they really like it. Like,
Yeah, it definitely was popular. Definitely was popular.
there's been a bunch of stuff like that. Like, my aunt drank one years and years ago. What was it? Zima.
Yeah, Zima.
Zima was one of those like strangely citrus, almost like a Fresca with alcohol in it. And then what were some other ones? I feel like there's a whole every few years, and every so often, a company will release essentially the same basic theme. It's like a grapefruit, citrusy, fruit flavored alcoholic beverage that goes down really easily. And they're popular for a few years, and then everyone gets tired of it. Like, the number of people that get too sick by drinking too much of it too quickly reaches critical mass, and everyone stops drinking because they're like, "Oh no, I drank too much of that stuff last time, never again." And for some reason, people remember when that happens, but they don't remember when it happens because of whiskey or beer or rum or tequila or vodka or any of the standard alcohols, the liquors. I think sugar has to be some kind of component in this.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the sugar element because whenever it was Mike's Hard Lemonade,
Oh yeah.
people were drinking the shit out of that and getting like stomach um was like stomach ulcers, I think,
Oh
from
Lord.
all the sugar.
Well, that just seems like a terrible idea. A booze that gives you ulcers.
Well, it doesn't give you ulcers, they just drank too much of it.
Oh.
But it was like it was either the Mike's Hard Lemonade or the Smirnoff Ice, one of them. But it was fucking people's stomach linings up because they were just drinking too much. Like, and then they had to come out and say like, "Don't drink a 6 pack. Don't drink a whole 6 pack."
Whoa. An alcoholic beverage that punishes you for binge drinking on the weekend.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, that's kind of dark. It's like, oh yeah, you can drink a shit ton of it, but it's also going to give you an ulcer if you overdo it. But you'll have a lot of fun while you get that ulcer.
Yeah, it was a Smirnoff Ice.
The Smirnoff Ice ulcer. Poor bastards.
Because I remember it was like very big. But then a bunch of people started reporting the stomach aches. And then they found out it was ulcers.
You know what's funny is that Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Dr. Pepper, even to a lesser degree, but those sodas will all like strip grease off of an engine. They'll dissolve meat, and yet you can drink an entire 2 liter of Coca-Cola and it won't give you an ulcer. But if you drink 6 bottles of Smirnoff Ice, it'll give you an ulcer. Years ago I remember reading about a lady in England who all she drank was 2 liters of pop, and eventually it killed her. But it took her like 30 years of nonstop pop drinking from like the time she was in her 10 early teens to the moment she was in her 40s, like that her body just gave out, and she was drinking like 6 liters of Coke a day.
Good God.
But even that, like, that's obscene. Like, alcoholics, I can't imagine an alcoholic is drinking that much beer every day. But a 6-pack a day of Smirnoff Ice could lead to ulcers. Something about that seems extremely wrong. Like, just from a chemical standpoint, what kind of crap is in
I mean,
there?
she probably had ulcers and just wasn't reporting on
Oh
it.
yeah, that's true.
That's what I think a lot of that shit comes down to is these people who have these horrible health habits aren't reporting stuff that is like actually also wrong with them because I think it's even with quote unquote healthy people, there's shit that we walk around with that hurts that we don't have time to address that everybody could probably do with a doctor's visit right now, that there's probably something ailing every single person that is either listening or talking, but it's just a matter of like between the cost of the healthcare, but also just the general lack of time to be able to be that like. Then you have to make a doctor's appointment, and then you have to not work that day. There's all these things that you
So from
have to adjust to go to the doctor to like. If it's not like a life or death situation, you don't want to take the time out of your day to do it.
Yeah. From a cursory glance at the internet, it looks like the high acidic content of Coca-Cola or sodas in general do not cause ulcers because the body's reaction is to produce less stomach acid.
Huh, interesting.
So maybe the trick is that it's those beverages that cause ulcers just have a lot of sugar and cause our stomachs to do really weird things, whereas soda might have a lot of sugar, but the acidity of it alone is sufficient that it doesn't cause those kind of problems. I drink a lot of like lemonade and orange juice and limeade, and that stuff's as acidic as it gets.
I mean, but so is our stomach lining.
Exactly. So is our stomach lining, or that part of our body is very acidic in there too. And so maybe maybe it's more about. I keep coming back to maybe it's sugar. Maybe it's the sugar content that causes the real stomach problems.
I think that's probably it. But even then, regular cola has like what 30 grams of sugar in a serving or 45.
I think a Coke. I
So
think Coke has like 30 something, 39 grams. I think Mountain Dew is in like the 40s or something like that.
yeah, they're in the 30s and 40s for
Dr
sure.
Pepper is at the low end of the scale. Um,
So I can't imagine again. I'm sure she had some probably ulcers at some
yeah,
point, like just the sheer amount of sugar she was gonna probably be intaking.
yeah.
Like that just doesn't seem possible, right?
Well, I think she
But,
suffered like liver and kidney failure.
mm,
So
Well, the liver processes
everything.
sugar as well as alcohol.
Yeah, the liver processes everything.
Yeah, if you're overloading it, or somebody who, for instance, if somebody regularly consumes alcoholic beverages that have relatively high sugar content.
So every so often I read about somebody it's almost always a home brewer, but they end up with autobrewery syndrome where they end up with yeast in their stomach, and because they have a sugary diet, their body converts the sugars into alcohol in their stomach.
Hmm.
and the first time I read about it, I thought like, wow, what a cool thing to have happen. But apparently, it's terrible because the people who develop autobrewery syndrome are drunk all the time,
Oh,
like can't function after a while, even though they're producing alcohol. Like they're not developing a sufficient tolerance at the rate that they produce alcohol. It just fucks them up.
if it's reversible?
I don't know. It's a really rare condition that only
Yeah.
appears like it appears so infrequently in the media that I think that it's used as a tool to discourage people from homebrew and trying to work with yeast on their own in less than
Hmm.
ideal conditions, because most breweries they look like giant machines, but they're also essentially laboratories. Like
There's,
like
I mean,
building.
there was a. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, producing, hundreds of gallons of beer at a time is an exacting science at that scale. It's not just like, let's make this and see how it turns out, because at an industrial level, the goal is for consistency. So you
Yeah,
can't.
there was a pretty big, at least in Massachusetts, there was a pretty big homebrew craze, and I don't know if it's persisting, but there were stores that were popping up that sold um, homebrew equipment, and people would be setting up homebrews in their garages. I think it was also popular um, on the Western Seaboard, like in Oregon, Washington, California.
Yeah.
But some of these, at least in Massachusetts, the only one that opened up around here ended up going out of business. I'm not sure there was enough demand after a period of time, or people just chose to go to the many breweries that, or craft breweries that ended up opening up in the area. I'm not sure what they're doing now. And it's a specialized technique, but the auto brewery syndrome, that sounds pretty scary.
well, I think homebrewing is dangerous too because it's one of those things where if you become really good at it, but not good enough to become a professional, then you just have a bunch of alcohol all the time.
A buddy of mine from high school, he got really good at making his own shine, and he made this like peach and blackberry brandy one time. It was fantastic. My dad loved it because he's like, yeah, I've got a
Mhm.
moonshine guy now, and he would make it, and then he would sell it to, well, he'd give it to his friends. And my dad was like, he's like, just tell me when he's got more. Tell him I'll pay him. And it's like, no, he'll just give it to you because. But it's one of those things. It was funny because like for a while there, it was exactly as you described. Every time I went over to his house, he was like, "Hey, do you want to take a shot of this moonshine I just made?" And he was like, "No, dude, I'm okay. I don't need to drink moonshine like every time I come over. That's not why I come over." But
Well, and the whole reason I say it like that is because I have a friend who started. He was a home brewer for a while, and he eventually started working for BBC. And like, whenever I would go over there, he would serve tasters in actual like he would serve beer in shot glasses,
Yeah.
and that's how you knew he wasn't getting fucked up all the time because he's not like, hey, here's the new one I just made. Here's a pint. It's like, no, here's these 3 different kinds I made.
And 2 ounces at a
Here's
time.
a taster of each kind. We're not getting fucked up. You're tasting it, so it wasn't like,
Yeah.
he's not just getting fucked up.
Well,
And
that's
there's a huge difference.
yeah. I remember the last time it was offered, it was like there was 100 and something proof, and then a 90 something proof, and then uh, stuff that's like all just like super strong, and then finally there was like an 80 proof. Four shots of different type of alcohol later, and these are all things that I'm doing like maybe a thimble size sip because I've seen what happens when people drink that stuff way too quickly, and sometimes it's amusing, but it's usually not amusing. I think that's like a complete and total next level dedication to drinking. I mean, I think it's one thing to really get into like complex flavor profiles of different whiskeys or scotches or whatever, or the complex flavor profile of an IPA. And wine too. Sure, that's just all good and dandy, but I think for some people, none of that matters. It was like you were saying about people who eat really spicy food or think that Olive Garden is gourmet. That there's a certain group of people that it just doesn't matter at all, and they just want the delivery mechanism because it's an efficient delivery mechanism. It's like the same group is more interested in a vape pen than they are in pre-rolls even, because one of them is smoking and the other one is this really efficient delivery mechanism. Although a good Canagar is like a next level type of experience, and I've only seen them like online. I've never seen one in person, so. But those things are wicked expensive.
I'm still skeptical about the leaf.
Yeah. I don't know how they can get the leaf to work like that. But
And not taste like shit.
yeah. I mean, they've got to like grind it down and do like basically like a Black and Mild style Pringle wrap where it's paper made out of leaf maybe. But I feel like that kind of that part just I don't get.
I mean, I think they use like big ass indica.
Oh, big sun leaf.
Yeah, but as far as I can tell, but again, that's where I'm like, I don't know how that's gonna taste. Where I'd rather almost not smoke that.
Yeah, leaves burn real hot, like way hotter than paper or tobacco even.
And they don't taste good,
And
which-
they taste terrible.
That's one of those things that it seems like people did it for the sake of
Marketing.
just saying, like, yeah, marketing. Like, oh, this is cannabis leaf joint. And it's like, but how does it taste?
It tastes like hot ass, but you're not gonna care because it'll get you real high. That's I don't think that's actually part of the marketing. I think that's just my.
No, because, I don't think it actually, I don't think the leaf actually helps.
No, I think that's just to appease the desire to smoke an all herb
Yep.
cigar.
And just, it's just marketing at that point, which is where, when marketing starts to affect cannabis culture like that, that's when I'm like, I think we've hit the point of diminishing returns.
Oh, speaking of diminishing
Capitalism
returns,
is like,
there's I was listening to NPR, and there's a guy at a cannabis shop talking about how he was actually throwing away sub 20 THC percentage herbs because people weren't buying them. They wanted the 20 up percentage weeds. And so they end up with these products that nobody's buying, even though they are better in their opinion. It's like, these are really good. There's nothing wrong with them. They just have a different profile. They've got more terpenes. They've got more of this other stuff. They've got a unique flavor profile, and they work really well. And it's almost like the market has become so fixated on just raw THC content at the expense of the other parts of the entourage. And so there's all this product that's not moving because it's only 16% THC or only 13% THC, but never mind that it actually like rocks someone's world and maybe it'll like light somebody up the right way. People aren't even taking the time to discover that because they're looking at the numbers, and the marketing has made it all about this one metric, one number out of like half or out of a page worth of numbers. It makes no sense to me.
So in Massachusetts, there was a ban on selling cannabis vape products when there was that nationwide focus and concern on the effects of various.
Oh, the vitamin E acetate scare.
Right, the vitamin E acetate, right? So currently in Massachusetts, there's 619,000 unsellable concentrated marijuana oil vaping cartridges, and that's $25 million worth of the product. And they're just sitting there gathering dust, and the state has no idea what to do with them.
I got a couple ideas. They need any ideas? Tell them, call me.
Well, one of the concerns is that all of the because we in Massachusetts there's the Cannabis Control Commission, and there are a lot of guidances and guidelines on quality assurance and quality control.
Here at the CCC, we're ensuring that this stuff gets you really fucked up.
Right. They have to ensure the labeling and the packaging is proper, and that everything about what's going in is properly indicated on a label. But also the testing has to test for things like heavy metals. And one of the concerns is that although the products initially, or the oils initially, were quality control tested with diagnostics for things like lead or cadmium or heavy metals, things like that could have leached in when the marijuana plants were growing. Now it seems that it's possible that there are components from the cartridges themselves that could be leaching into the oil that's contained within those cartridges. So they're not sure if they can move forward with even considering returning them for retail without another round of testing.
Yeah, I feel
well, they could. I'm thinking about this. They could potentially reprocess them, and they might lose some of the product in the process. But I'm fairly positive if you reprocess that shit, you could just extract all the heavy metals and particulates through the actual same process as before.
Yeah. That would just require a little bit of extra effort, but they wouldn't lose their total investment.
Exactly, because then they're like, well, we just got to throw it out because, we can't do anything, instead of, actually assessing the situation to say, yeah, you could reprocess it and only lose 30% or 40% and actually be able to resell it knowing that it was free of heavy metals and particulates again. But, that just takes effort. That's something our government just is not good at, apparently.
Yeah, effort.
It would be the state government's responsibility. And they've tried to be pretty forward thinking about it. There's dispensaries all over the place for medicinal and recreational.
Yeah, it's 2020. This shit shouldn't have to be distinguished as medicinal or recreational. Alcohol is legal. There are only a few places that still have weird ass antiquated laws. I think Utah even changed their beer laws, their alcohol laws recently. I feel like there's so much conflict in this idea that we live in this modern civil society, and yet some people can't be trusted with a plant that grows literally anywhere, Tim, one of our contributors, at one point he and I were talking about how apparently if you take hemp even and plant it in coal ash fields, it cleans up the soil. And of course the product itself isn't really usable on any level other than like a bioreactor, so it can be used to turn into energy, but it can clean up coal ash. Like, clearly this thing needs more research than it's being given.
Yeah, but it just solves too many problems. So yeah, it's crazy how many solutions are out there that are not being adopted, or um, problems persist because our government on the local or federal level doesn't want to, you know, change itself. Um, that's just the story every single time, is the government just not wanting to change itself.
Wouldn't it be great if we had a government that was comprised of people who were willing to put in a little bit of effort?
Yeah, that's that sounds like you're asking for utopia to some people, where we just gotta not have fucking clowns in office.
Well, one of the reasons why the hemp industry is kind of slow to catch up to any other particular industry, or why there's stigma to begin with. I mean, there's stigma for cultural reasons. I think we got a dog in the background, maybe. But there was a tax act on cannabis products and hemp products that was passed um, largely with the help or lobbying of major industrialists at the time who had holdings in the lumber industry. And the hemp industry had actually been growing at a pretty steady rate up until that time, and was perceived as a threat by people who controlled the lumber industry. And subsequently, the product itself was sort of phased out or put in the back seat in favor of other industrial products.
It was like a newspaper baron, right? Who was really big in lobbying Congress to create marijuana the Tax Stamp Act.
William Randolph Hearst.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was Randolph Hearst,
Yeah.
the DuPont family, and Andrew Mellon.
yeah. Fuck those guys. Sometimes I wonder like how much of the current situation we have now what didn't need to happen. Like how much of it was really just some effort to maintain somebody's existing revenue stream for something else. How many times has this happened where we've been presented with some opportunity for sustainable energy or sustainable something else, and it's been backburnered or sidelined because somebody wanted to keep being able to make money off of some old system?
Well, the DuPont family was benefiting off of nylon at the time, and Hearst was benefiting off of wood pulp, and then hemp could have been a substitute for either.
Yeah. Not to mention all of its industrial lubricant applications. Or now we can make stuff called hempcrete, which has greater fire resistant properties than a lot of other building materials, and it's light, and it is its insulation, stuff like that. It just blows my mind so much, so many times. Like how many, like just thinking about it, it's like, wait a second, we already have a solution to a lot of these problems, but we just we don't get access to them.
Yeah, and then it makes it seem as if we need to solve these problems, when actually it's just a matter of finding the solutions that have been buried before. They always talk about what was it, the Evo 4? Um, I think it was the GM, either GM or
Oh, the
Chevy.
Volt, not the Volt. It was the
Oh, the Volt,
EV1.
yeah.
It was before the Volt. It was the GM EV1.
EV1, yeah.
Yeah, but it only had like I think it only had like a 40 or 50 miles, maybe 60 mile range. But if you lived in a city and you only drove like 20 or 30 miles a day anyways, it was apparently they were great. Apparently they accelerated really quickly. There's this whole documentary about him where Danny DeVito is going off about how he loved it and how he was so mad when they showed up one day and took it. They like distracted his ass and loaded it onto the back of a truck and disappeared before he could tell him to get like, off his property. But it was part of the agreement. They were only borrowing them for a test group, and then GM goes and destroys them all. So just wasn't going to
Yeah,
make enough money.
it's crazy how they have these deals where, you can get a car, but you don't actually own it. Because I think the same thing happened with John Cena, where he purchased like a Ford GT1, or is it? I think it was GT1. Whatever it was, he GT40 maybe. He went to go sell it,
Oh yeah, they
and
sued
then
his
they were
ass.
like, "Nope, you can't do that. We're taking the car back."
Yeah, I remember. I remember
Because he tried to sell it.
there were a few examples of that where somebody would buy that car. Um, I think it was yeah, it was just the Ford GT. And they tried to sell it, but then Ford was like, no, per your agreement, you can't sell it for X amount of years, and if you violate this, then you forfeit the car or some shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine being on a waiting list your entire life, essentially. You finally get the car. You realize, man, this car is just not what I wanted or expected because, most people aren't endurance racers and have no real business with a vehicle like that, which isn't designed for a regular street, but designed for a racetrack. And also to be maintained meticulously every time you start it. You got to take it apart and put it back together and all that kind of stuff. And so when they want to sell it, it's like, no, sorry, buddy, you should have read the fine print.
Oh, I guess they ended up settling with him
Yeah.
and ended up donating all the money to charity.
You can sell it, but you got to give away all the money.
Yeah,
Probably wrote it off on his taxes.
right.
Oh, God, I hope so. Speaking of John Cena, that guy is actually pretty amusing. He did a movie where it was like a kids movie where he was a smoke jumper, and I he's like it made me think of Ernest Goes to Camp, but only if Ernest was this muscly ex-marine dude who is actually quite likable and kind of funny, and actually a really gifted with um, somewhat painful looking physical comedy. He did a really good job. I think that he could actually do Ernest. Like if they were to reboot one of those Ernest stories, he could do Ernest Goes to Camp or Ernest Summer Camp with starring John Cena, and he could do it. Like he could really do it. He's funny enough. He can
Yeah.
do the straight face. He can be serious. He can do all those things.
Or it could be like a comedy action adventure where it's like Ernest goes to the future or some shit,
Yeah,
and he's
and
like,
like or Ernest from the future. Even it's
yeah.
like Ernest's great grandson. He comes back and it's John Cena, and he's like muscle bound, but he still gets into the Ernest predicaments. I think
The
there's
Ernest Prime from the Ernest multiverse, the strongest Ernest of all.
it turns out that Ernest is from the future, and all Ernests are actually like a variation of this Ernest. It's like a play on Rick and Morty at that point.
Yeah,
Oh, that's great.
yeah,
Ernest the Super Soldier.
right.
Replicant Ernest.
Oh man. So yeah, now we've got Ernest existing in the Blade Runner universe.
By the way, happy 7 of 9 day.
Ooh yeah, happy 7 of 9 day. Quite possibly the most like equitable or the only female character to experience true like equality in that entire show.
Yeah.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Space Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, radioballistic.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.